I'm Melody. I am a part of the careers committee with DSCSG, and Kate is the head director, and we are joined today with Jenny, who will be answering questions for us in regards to careers in criminology and further studies and anything else really. Yeah. Okay. So the first question is how did you begin your career, and did you start it with a degree or a certificate or something like that?
So I didn't start with a degree or qualification, but that was because the Victoria Police, when I joined, which was a very long time ago, probably before you were born, in 1988, and that back in those days they didn't actually have a qualification as sort of a prerequisite or a preferred prerequisite. Mm-hmm. But there was a really strong emphasis on, personalities and the type of, life skills that you had and things like that, which they still have now. I actually finished high school after year 11 because I was offered work. I lived in a small country town in Victoria. It wasn't a thing to go to university. It wasn't any universities nearby, so you had to sort of really move away. So the idea of bringing in money was so much more appealing to me as a 17-year-old than it was go on and do year 12, which is probably not a good thing to hear. But at the same time, it was different then. And so, but it was good for me because at 17, I moved away from home, moved away from the town, and I got a job in a bank, and I was really sort of, on my own, really independent.
You got that independence,
which probably helped. So when I applied for the police force, which was really because my cousin, my mum's cousin actually was in the police force at the time. It's not something I'd really considered, but the bank just wasn't challenging me enough, and I just felt like I needed something a little bit more interesting or challenging, and that sort of, piqued my interest, I suppose. And it was also quite a difficult process to go through. So you really had to want to do it. Even back then, it was really quite a difficult process, and they didn't have the number of people going through the police academy as they do now. So it was quite hard to get into. And so by the time I finally got in, I was 20 years old. So, but I'd been living in Melbourne, and I'd learnt some, life skills, I suppose. And so it really sort of set me up, I suppose, just for that application. Whereas, people in my academy were so much older than me as well, but there were some around my age as well. So I think I might have answered that first question well and truly, but that was...
No, that's okay.
The decision was really around, the challenge and just something a little bit just to take me away from, the country town and, out of my sort of little comfort zone, I suppose. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that sounds
Do you
amazing.
mind if I add a question in there?
Go for it. Absolutely, go for it.
Fantastic. I was just wanted to ask if you had to do anything in particular to help or assist you in that difficult process.
To get in. To
join the police, yeah.
So the first step was the application itself, and then you had to do an exam. I've got a really funny story actually about the exam. There's an entrance exam, and I was probably a little bit blasé too. And again, that comes back to sort of my age. I was a little bit sort of, I'll get there. It'll be easy. When I did the exam, and you had to do essays and knowledge questions, and there was a psychology, 500 questions. It was really long. But I finished before everybody else, and I just thought, I've nailed this, But then when I sort of looked at other people, they were still going on their questions, and they still had more pages, and they seemed to, because it's like a booklet, they seemed to sort of have more to do. And then it turns out I was missing about a third of the actual whole exam. There was a whole range of pages missing, but time was up. And so I told the instructors, I think I'm missing some pages from my exam. And sure enough, I was. But they basically said, oh, well, it's fine. What you've done actually is enough. So I didn't actually do the full exam, but I had to hang around and wait for them to actually check what I had done to make sure that I'd done enough. Otherwise, I would have had to do more. So then you'd sort of go on and you had to do the physical. And again, you sort of had to be very prepared for what you were coming up against. But again, I was really naive and hadn't really thought too much about it, didn't put too much time and effort into it. I was always quite active. I played a lot of sport. So it didn't seem to be a big issue for me. But I was pretty shocked on the day that there was people that just couldn't do some of the things that they were required to do. Quite a difficult process. And then, lots of face-to-face interviews with these people, like high-ranking police officers that you sort of had to really, show that you're confident and that, you had the ability to be a police officer at such a young age as well. So, and at that stage, you could get in at 18 and you still can now, but they just don't let people in at that age. It's just too young.
Of course.
Yeah, just too young. So it's a lot of preparation involved. Yeah.
Thank you.
It makes it worth it, doesn't it?
It was, and I think, but at the same time, I probably could have done a lot more to prepare, because I know a lot of people did a lot of preparation, because of the various stages. There's a whole range of different things you've got to consider at the same time. So, yeah.
That's cool. How do you think being a police officer has impacted your life or your further career choices?
So because it was really it was my second job I'd had as a kid, or as a teenager, I'd done a lot of part-time jobs in hospitality and that sort of thing, but sort of like my first big gig, I suppose. The training itself was really a great, the camaraderie in the police academy, the skills that you learn, the discipline that you had to have. I just remember some of the days where you had chores that you had to do every day. And I remember one week we had this huge exam on motor vehicle law, and I was standing in the corridor handing out new sheets. Like, you had to change your sheets every Tuesday. So I was handing out new sheets to all the other recruits while I was studying my notes. So the discipline that you had to have to, stick to your studies, keep your fitness up, learn that, the skills, the practical skills that you had to learn. And you're living in the academy, so, you're fully immersed in this whole environment. So that in itself was such a huge learning curve, in particular for a lot of people that didn't particularly like that sort of authority either. So I think that's where I was probably lucky. And, you had to learn drill, like marching, things like that. That was all about discipline. You had to spit polish your shoes. So your shoes had to be, the tips had to be shiny. And, that would take you 2-3 hours a night, because I had to be like that every single day. So there was just, and you had to, room inspections, all that sort of stuff that you sort of see is really just about that discipline and being able to show that you can actually have that sort of discipline to do all of those things and do them all well. And that's really sort of how you then take those skills out into the police force as well. Then once I started, 20 years of age, out in a police van, working with people probably not much older than I was, and just what I was exposed to. And my first station that I worked at was Reservoir in Melbourne. And I don't know if you know much about Reservoir, but it was a bit of a rough area at that stage. And, one of the first jobs we went to was, I think it was a drug. There'd been a raid on a house that morning. We had to go to the house and sort of help with sort of the seizing of drugs and all that sort of stuff. Hit run accident of a 10-year-old boy, these sort of things that just no other 20-year-old is ever exposed to. And, I still remember them, a lot of what I did, but it hasn't sort of affected me to the point where I couldn't keep going. It was just more of a, wow, there's not many 20-year-olds that are being exposed to this type of, work. And so, but then, after I'd been in there for a while, because I was at Reservoir for about 2 years, which is sort of my training station, but you sort of stayed on a bit longer. By the time, that 2 years was up, I was sort of the more senior person on patrol as well. So 21, 22 years of age in charge on a shift, and you are exposed to a whole range of different things. And from, minor shoplifting right through to, major fatal accidents and giving death messages to people that have lost a loved one. Those sorts of things just change you as a person, or the growth that you experience as a person is just out of this world. And I still now reflect and look back on what I did as a child and what I learned in that, those 10 years. And I'm still using those skills now. How you manage people, like domestic situations, and you're going to a circumstance where husband and wife are arguing over something. You walk in as a police officer, you're there to, sort of solve and at least break them up. But they look to you for advice. They look to me for, I was 21, 22 years of age. I wasn't married. They want marriage advice and relationship advice and what do you want me to do, and how do I, or you take a woman out of a domestic violence situation and put her in a, like a special accommodation, then you find out the next day she's gone back home, and, this whole range of things that you're exposed to that just not everyone else is. And I really do now sort of use and call back on those skills, in particular around emergency management. One of my previous jobs in the last few years was at Colac Otway Shire, and it was in 2016, 17, the bushfires they had in Wye River. And my job down there was to manage governance and councillors, but when there was this major emergency, all of a sudden my emergency management skills just kicked in. So I went into that mode of telling people, problem solving, really quick decision making, because that's the sort of thing you had to do in the police force. Is you had to make really quick decisions. You had to think on your feet. You had to be able to manage relationships and different attitudes from people and behaviours from people in a way that calmed the situation and just kept everybody under control. And it just sort of kicked in all of a sudden. So I found that really interesting, that all of a sudden I was back where I was in the police force. So it's just those skills, I think, that you learn, how to deal with people, problem solving, thinking on your feet. We learned all the theory in the police academy, but we didn't actually really learn until we got out on the street. I think they do a lot more now in the academy. They do a lot more practical training in the academy. But you can only do so much, sort of role plays and things like that until you actually get out there into the real world. You just don't know. So, yeah, it really did set me up, I think, for my future career. And all my roles since then, because in my last few years of the police force, I started doing, because there was very few females when I joined. So that was probably, the turning point, I suppose, about the time that I went in, when they started to get more females. But when I was out in the police stations, there was a lot of push for that proactive policing. So kindergartens and daycares and schools and all that sort of thing. And no one ever wanted to go out to them and do them. Policemen, traditionally back in those days, they just wanted to be street cops. They didn't want to go and put the siren on for kids at a kindergarten, or talk to them about being safe and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I sort of ended up being the person that got sent out to those things all the time. Because I was only one of 3 or 4 females in the station, and I loved it. Like, it was so much fun. The kids would just lose their minds just when you went out in the uniform, and you always got asked how many people have you shot and all this sort of stuff. It's just it's really good fun. So then it sort of transpired into sort of doing primary schools and secondary schools, and I did a lot of year 9s, 10s, 11s, 12s, like legal studies classes, talking about, crime and a whole range of things. A lot of the time it was just really anything and everything. And I started doing, in sort of the last few years, I started doing a year 9 all-girls school in Melbourne. I think it was like in Nunawading, a Box Hill it was. It was an all-girls school. I can't remember the name of it. But the teacher wanted me to come and talk about the geography of crime, and which is boring because it was a geography class. And so she just wanted me to talk about the geography of crime, like crime, what happens where and what do we do about it when it's, high crime rate. And the girls it was year 9. So I don't know if you remember year 9, but, bad attitudes, like they just didn't really want to be there. And I've turned up in my uniform, and I was only in my mid-20s at this stage, and they were really quite, in particular, a few that sat sort of out the back, in the back of the room. Is that your cat?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's all right. I just see the tail. There was these girls that sat in the back with real attitudes. They had their arms crossed and their feet up on the desk, just didn't want to be there. But then they started asking me questions, about my job and what I do and how I do it. And then we got on to sort of topics of like rape and sexual assault and really sensitive questions. And it just became this like 2 hours of them just picking my brain about really important things to them rather than this. And the teacher just let it go because she could see that it was really valuable. So that teacher actually got me to come back year after year and just do that same thing with that same group, and started off the same way, and it always ended up the same way. And they were just fascinated, one, that I was a police officer and female, but also young, but also could give them some really frank and fearless advice about, their life, and questions that they probably don't normally get to ask of a police officer. So it was actually really, really valuable. But I did that as well as sort of operational duty. So I had a whole range of work. I just loved it. It was actually really good. So